Welcome to the Outer Realms with Michelle DeRoche and Amelia Pisano. Airing live on the United Public Radio Network, 105.3 FM in New Orleans.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday night segment of the Outer Realms. Sorry, just trying to get myself a little bit organized here. Anyway, we are broadcasting live on the United Public Radio Network, UFO Paranormal Radio Network, 105.3 and 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. We are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee, who have been a part of our journey since the very beginning. So thank you, Folgers. We appreciate you so very much. Also, big thank you to Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon, aka Justin Snicker, for the contribution of his voice and his music and his time. That is I guess the voice and the music that you hear for our intro. So anyway, big thank you to him. He is an award-winning composer of Halloween horror, sci-fi, and dark wave electronic music, which can be found anywhere that good music can indeed be found. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind our banners and logos here at the Outer Realm. Check him out on Facebook and Instagram. He also specializes in horror-themed artwork, but has a whole variety of amazing things and can do some pretty fabulous commission pieces. So check him out. So today, people, it is International Paranormal Day. So happy International Paranormal Day. And just a perfect time for our guest this evening to be joining us, which of course is Brian Baker. He's the owner of Superstitious Times. He's going to be discussing an article that myself and a few colleagues contributed to probably about a couple months ago. And it is pretty amazing. And it covers a lot of different things, such as stigma of a haunted location and how we're going to use Canada for the most part because he's in Canada, we're in Canada, and how it seems to be lagging behind a little bit, catching up. We need to catch it up to the times. There's a fantastic article, and it really does hit on a lot of different points. And we had quite a few of us chiming in on that. And I was able to do this from two standpoints. One being a standpoint of, being proprietor of a haunted location and bed and breakfast, and also working them and doing tours and representing haunted locations from a paranormal standpoint. So it's really interesting because we really are far removed, I think, from other countries with respects to how they handle things. I always say like Britain's way ahead of themselves with all of that, but so here we are. People are chiming in, and we have Amelia. You'll notice I'm by myself. Yes, I am by myself tonight, and she's under the weather. So everybody sent Bubbles some like good wishes, and there we go. Switched out. Yeah, because now we know who you are. so yeah, poor Bubbles. Oh, so anyway, so yeah, we got all kinds of people chiming in. Hi guys, hello. Hey Chris, hi William, hello Ruth, hello Margaret, hello. So we are basically, hello Dolly. Oh, come on, every time that happens, I want to just, you know the drill. I want to break out in song. I do. So Dolly and Preston Dennett also are hosts here on United Public Radio, and they have a show called The Light Gate. And right now that airs every Sunday night, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time. So they're brand new, and you may want to just check them all out. So without further ado, we're going to bring on our special guest, and we're going to get the ball rolling. Here we go. Hello. Can you hear me?
Hey, good
There we go.
evening.
That's better. Fantastic. How's it going?
Not too bad. Happy National Paranormal Day or International.
International. Yes, yes. Happy International Paranormal Day. Everybody gets like so excited about that. Amelia is not with us tonight. She's under the weather, so she's going to be in the chat room. So she'll like fire the odd question out from there. So there we go.
Get better soon.
I know. It's like send her some well wishes. Poor Bubbles. There we go. I don't know if we're glitching. Everybody, maybe chime in. Please bear in mind also, everybody, we are on, there's 7 different chat rooms right now. So it's kind of like a super highway coming down to one lane. Okay. It's not that we're ignoring anybody. It's just going to take us a bit of time to get to everyone. And again, if we're kind of sort of past that, we'll have to wait until we can catch up and ask questions. And we are on Roku TV. There is no chat room in Roku. So if you're trying, you're not going to find it. So Brian, I'm so pleased that you're here to join me tonight. And I wanted to, of course, we talked about the topic tonight, which was the article that you did on, I guess, how Canada just needs to catch up, which is so out there and passe,
Yeah, no, definitely. I was going to also say with the you're mentioning the highways coming into one. It's kind of like the 401 in summer, pretty much driving along.
Don't move. Just don't move ever. I know it's inches for
That
real.
might be a little inside baseball for people who are outside of Ontario, Canada. So sorry.
Yeah. I know people are like, what is that? What is that? It's just a bad highway. It's just really bad highway. So, but I'm sure we're not the only place in the world that's got them. But we seem to be one of the, I won't say the only place because I don't know for sure, but when it comes to the paranormal, we really are behind. It's been like this forever. So what prompted you to write this article?
Well, I to myself, for starters, I know when I first started my career in media and journalism,
Right.
I kind of kept my interest in the paranormal on the kind of down low, the QT, and that looking back on that, there was a person I was trying to interview for a Superstitious Times story about the ghost ship at Chaleur Bay, and he just got hired on at the CBC. He did not want to be interviewed, and that kind of got me thinking about how I started in media. And for 15 years in the media, I do a story here and there. I'd express enthusiasm about it, but not the overeager enthusiasm. And I'm relatively agnostic on a lot of this stuff, but
Right.
coming at it from a media standpoint, and I worked with both big and small media outlets like Torstar Digital, Toronto Star,
Yeah.
the Toronto Sun, Sun Media, and the Canadian Press, as well as local.
Yeah.
So that trying to pursue my profession as a journalist kind of made me keep my own interests quiet.
Right.
And it was triggered, that memory was triggered by that interview, the chat, the email back and forth with the gentleman who just got hired on at the CBC. And his documentaries can still be found on YouTube about the ghost ship at Chaleur Bay. I do believe I linked to it in the original article that was written back in 2018, 2019. Right. So, and then, doing Superstitious Times, we're in our 5th year now, which is, I'm very happy about that.
Congratulations. Yes.
I know I haven't been writing as profusely, but
yeah.
2 kids, a job, and kind of that sandwich moment where, you're trying to help out your family as well. So there's that aspect, but I'm still at it. And, talking with folks like Morgan Knudsen out in Edmonton,
Yes.
and Elliot Van Dusen in Nova Scotia,
yes,
Jason Hewlett in BC.
Mm-hmm.
There's a similar kind of pattern, and
Right.
I noticed it from trying to do interviews. I don't write for the Canadian Press or the Toronto Star, or any outlet. So it's outside of the Superstitious Times. So it's
Right.
harder to have that clout to get corporations to chat with you as well.
Right.
The struggle of, all too familiar for a journalist who's worked in community news, uh,
Yes.
trying
Yes.
to get out there with the big dogs and try and get the story.
Right. Right.
So, but yeah, that pretty much came down to it. The pattern is that Canada saw it as a liability. The paranormal was like, ooh, I don't want to touch that. Away, away, away.
Yeah, we don't
Uh,
want to talk about that. Yeah. I know. I
it's like
know. I
we could
know.
do a meme about it with,
You
all those
could.
kids from Clueless saying "ew" as if, right?
I know. Yeah, we're just not going there. Yeah.
Yeah,
I spent 20 years in that industry. Believe me, I get it. It's never changed.
yeah. You had
It's
some very salient points as well with the Casa Loma experience. Um,
yes.
yeah.
Yes. I think when you asked me to participate in the article, it was great because I could do it from two standpoints. From the researcher, the person who would be a paranormal representative to many locations. I mean, Casa Loma was one of them. But the thing about Casa Loma, it was very prestigious. So I was very surprised, that they decided to open their doors. Um, because the Kiwanis, I mean, it's like a good old boys club. I mean, and most of the time they're elderly good old boys too, and they don't want to talk about this stuff. But I think when the curator of the castle sat down with me, she at the time she said, for over 50 years, stories have been coming in, and they have decided, being the Kiwanis, have decided that they were going to open their doors, and they wanted to see if this was something that was continuing on. Could we do something here? Because they were non for profit. So could we do something here to help benefit the castle itself, to help with repairs and upkeep? And I thought, oh, wow. So it was a real honor, to be considered. Like a lot of people have tried, and they approached my colleague and I at the time, and we were like, wow, sure. No, no, we don't want the haunted castle. But that's part of it too, is we didn't know if was it really haunted or not. Because, it's a castle. Everybody automatically assumes it was haunted. And she said, through the years, we've had stories, and many of those stories we have never told anyone, because that's how we can tell if people are having real experiences or if they're not, if they're just assuming that they're having experiences, because, some stories kept resurfacing. And part of our job to represent the locations, was to see if those stories would resurface. And if they did, they would validate them for us. But they did not just come out. They would tell us generic stories, but there was always the ones that were kept back from even us. And
Mm.
many people came forward and pegged many of those stories. And sometimes they came from very unlikely sources. Children would come out and
Mm.
blah, 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 blah. I'm like, I go to the curator, okay, blah, blah, blah. She goes, oh, yeah, that's accurate. And the child is like 7. And it's the kid that gets it, because they're supposed to be natural seers. And
Mhm.
they don't always have that built-in fear. Like, like I think we as a culture instill that fear.
Mm.
But it's
Mhm.
not like children, I was 5, seeing dead people was no big thing to me. But,
Yeah.
with the article, also with the B&B, it was the other standpoint. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, you mentioned that, people were coming in, they were wanting to dabble in stuff they didn't really fully understand, the seances, the Ouija boards, and and you expressed concerns about, oh God, what is it now? Yeah, I think the quote I have you saying is, oh, what did they do now? We got
it's
to go
true.
in there and clean it out.
It's true. You know, like, what I was representing a location, or whether I was just preparing the spirits of our home for guests at that time, I would do just that. I would prepare them and say, okay, this is what's going on this evening. Partake if you'd like to. Don't partake. It doesn't matter. I just don't want you being caught off guard. I used to do this even with Sir Henry Pellet, and I've had recordings of just a big sigh behind me. I'm just like, wow. Is that really you? Because he loved to share the castle. So I don't know. I'm the only one in the room, the only one on the floor, the only one in the whole wing of the building. So it was interesting to me. But and the timing. But our spirits used to act up. And depending on the people, sometimes the house would go opposite. If it wasn't a good experience, if they weren't nice people, you have people that come in and demand, I demand you to show yourself, blah, blah, blah. The spirits would go quiet for sometimes a week or 2 weeks. There'd be nothing. It was like crickets, just quiet. So I don't know.
I definitely needed that balance. And I think having that perspective, even from your angle, of course, not the corporation, but as
Yes.
a person who's deeply invested in the paranormal, and that definitely added that difference, that kind of balance. When I did reach out, and then there's been a couple of times, every article I write, I try to get that balance. And if a corporation poo-poos it, then,
Yeah.
as a journalist, it's your job to get someone to talk to it who is at ground level. Because I'm like articles I've written about places in Saskatchewan and PEI, I'm not there.
Right.
You need
Right.
someone who's there to, be the expert. And the Accor, the company that owns a lot of the Fairmont properties that have these big elaborate stories, the Bride, of course, in Banff Springs, which is on a stamp, a Canada Post stamp. I think they gave me some generic response, and being a journalist, the whole spokesperson kind of, we don't really want to address this, but we'll humor you in this instance. And the follow-up questions were just fed on, like no response after that. So and that's that's the best most people can do when you're doing a big feature on this and trying to even promote or like get the conversation going about this, because there's so much folklore in Canada,
It's
and
awkward, isn't it?
yeah, it's beneath the
You
surface.
can hear a pin drop.
It's like, sitting in the newsroom, and I'm a big horror movie buff.
Yes.
And I'm always apprehensive because, the stigma behind horror, being male too, liking horror movies. And I'm not a slasher film guy. I'm the supernatural ilk or the creature feature. But, people kind of come out of their shell when they're just kind of connecting. Oh, I saw that movie. I've seen a couple Ari Aster's films and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, there's that engagement and people open up. And then when they realize you're into the paranormal, like outside of the realm of pop culture, some people open up even more. Oh, I love that stuff. A former colleague of mine at the Canadian Press, she loves it.
Right.
And
Right.
it's cool. It's beneath the surface. It's there. But
Yes.
getting people to open up and share it on camera, in print, is a different story altogether. And I know that was my I was well aware of that when I went into launching the Superstitious Times.
Right.
I wanted to be a journalist. If you're not going to go on record, like I can anecdotally share it and reference it as a source, but I can't use it as a person. And these stories, these experiences are entirely personal. So if you don't have a person talking about it, then it's just almost like writing a Stephen King novel or something like that. It's just it's lost the validity, the campfire folklore. It's gone.
Right.
So I Yeah, I just it's fascinating that dynamic where people want to talk about it off
Mhm.
on the sly, but on camera or whatever, it's a whole different story.
It is, yeah. I agree. I think we are just behind the times we always have been. When I came into the field, I called it like the Ghostbusters era. Everybody kind of jumped on, but they went in waves. Everybody would go in waves. It's like, okay, so we're having a quiet couple of years right now. Okay, just with ghost tours, things like that. You would see people come out. I mean, you're booking and 500 people are trying to get on your tour in one weekend, and you're just like, what's going on? Then one year it's just like 10 people. It's like, the interest seemed to change with the media. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, I mean, I always say like England was way ahead of it. They never left it. Some of my favorite shows, started off in the UK, like Scariest Places on Earth was
Yeah,
right. And that's like, what is that, back 80s, like 90s
I
is one of
do.
like my most favorite shows. And I thought, it's very creative. And I think Most Haunted came on and broke, everything that were going like 11 seasons, and it got a bit ridiculous. I think after a while, a lot of people just sort of went, yeah. But Canada, US jumped on board. Canada just sort of went, no. And I know it was difficult to try to communicate with anyone. I mean, I used to get flooded with emails. I still do really, but for different reasons, just because people had a story to tell and they just wanted to be able to tell it to someone,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? But I have a
Yes.
question for you. So before we start going crazy there,
Oh
Dolly Safran, hello, Dolly. Do you follow news broadcasts to look for paranormal incidents? And have there been any?
oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. I was more, dedicated to it, when I was working in media. Give me a moment, my
Yes,
cat
of
is
course.
clawing at the door, so I
Oh, oh, get the cat.
sorry.
Yep.
Give me a minute. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Come on. Alright, you might see a cat come by here for a second, sorry.
That's okay. People bring on their pets all the time.
Um, yeah, I mean, one of the stories I did cover, there was a strange, noise that a hunter had, there we go. Is
Let
he
me in.
world? Is he there?
Yeah.
Um, in Sioux Lookout, Ontario, there was a gentleman who recorded a howling. It sounded rather Bigfoot-esque.
Yeah.
I hopped on that, and the interesting thing is somebody had already claimed trademark on the video, so
Right.
the video was being played, and I couldn't post it on my website or anything like that because I had to pay a fee, and I'm like, oh, geez.
Oh,
Well, there's always a workaround these things. You can kind of reference it, obviously,
right.
link
Right.
to the news story. But yeah, no, that's one example. There's another story about a UFO sighting by pilots in Baffin Island, and I
Hmm.
picked up on that.
Yeah.
Um, I had my Google alerts, and that's what's led me to a lot of kind of story leads. University of Manitoba
Hmm.
received a bunch of Chris Rutkowski's files and did a story on that. So
Right.
it's yeah, it's great. Like any journalist, you're trying to pick up the stories. You
Mm.
get press releases from some of the PR people that you have good rapport with, and so forth. So
Right.
yeah, for sure, and
Right.
that's great.
Yeah. Why do you think that everybody's so standoffish about it? I mean, I know for after being proprietor to one, we weren't standoffish with it, but we didn't. After a while, we weren't seeing a benefit. We love to give people a safe place to come
Mhm.
and have an experience if that's what was meant to be. And I would say 80% of the people had an experience, whether it was maybe very minute or whether it was substantial. Um, but there wasn't a lot of benefit after that because it was disturbing the chi within the house, shall we say?
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden we ended up on a bus tour without our permission. We're on a bus tour, and you'd have like 50 people filing out and taking pictures of the house. We would wake up. You're coming in. You have people wandering around on the front it was a big wraparound veranda. It was a Second Empire Gothic revival manor, right?
Nice.
And the cameras would all start going off. You'd have people on the property at night. You'd have people just trying to. It got to a point where the curtains were always drawn because it was just so, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the standoffishness it fascinates me because coming from an archaeology anthropology background, I love kind of
Yeah.
assessing why people believe a certain thing as a body, as a nation, and as an individual.
Mhm.
So I think with Canada, it's Canada. Let's be honest, on the economic side of thing,
Right.
we are still capitalist, but
Yes.
there's that Canadians don't now, the modern Canadian, we don't like to take risks as much as our cousins to the south.
That's true.
The
Yeah.
US, like if
Yeah.
I thought about this before now, today I was going through it and I was thinking there's an economic explanation for this as well. Not just
Mhm.
a social cultural where we kind of keep our beliefs in the paranormal, which are kind of rooted, most of Canada is rooted in Victorian's spiritualism.
Yes, that's true.
But with
Yes.
with the glut of paranormal shows and almost the comical aggro personalities that have kind of taken the throne,
Yes, I hear you.
found themselves as kings
Yes.
of the fiefdom, of course. There's that standoffishness. We don't want a bunch of people with cameras strapped to, running
No, it's true.
around in the building. And you pointed out a great example, and I remembered it right away. There was a young lady who somehow managed to get up on the roof of one Spadina
There was a
Crescent.
couple, yeah, I
Yeah,
remember
and
that, yeah.
she fell to her death. So
It was
it's like,
back in 2009, I think, that was a long
yeah,
time.
and it's stuff like that where it's like, death by curiosity killed the cat, that old
Yeah.
kind of saw, but it's nobody wants to kind of like take that risk, and
Mhm.
nobody wants to end up like that poor chambermaid in at the Empress Hotel and fall to
Yeah.
their death from there. And so it's a little bit of our inability as modern Canadians to take risks.
Mhm.
And I'm not I don't say that in a negative way.
Yeah.
I think we're more cautious.
Mhm.
Um, the U.S. is also a free market in a lot of things. I mean, here we always complain about the oligopoly of, our grocery stores are owned by three and our
Mhm.
media is owned by two. So the
Yes.
U.S. is a more free market. So that kind of opens up this. Well, I'm going to turn the Villisca Axe Murder House into a tourist attraction because there's
Yes.
nothing else in Iowa. But
And then they come from far and wide too.
so
So,
it's
yeah, yeah.
hey, I want to go there too. There's that draw of both,
Yes.
true crime and
Yes.
the whole trope of trauma leading to this paranormal aspect, and
Mm.
that's why Lizzie Borden's old house is visited in the same regard, or
Yes.
even the more oddball stuff like the Coral Castle in Florida and these aspects. So it's really that market in the U.S. to try and promote this kind of paranormal aspect. There's always a curiosity, and as I saw Amelia said there,
Yeah, Lorraine Warren did the
Warren.
big haunted footpaths of Toronto. Yeah, yeah, I've been with Lorraine in Toronto. Yeah, she's great.
And
Yeah.
I think that was one of the biggest things that kind of vaulted the paranormal in the spotlight.
Mm.
You had a surge in supernatural horror in the late 60s and early 70s with
Mhm.
films like Rosemary's Baby,
Yes.
um, the Amityville Horror from 69 to 79, these movies, The
Right.
Omen. And so that renewal and the interest of the supernatural, and then like being a horror movie buff, the 80s was just rife with slasher films, right? So the
Right.
supernatural was still there, but it was almost comical in films like House and House 2 and that aspect. But I think that's the economic side of things,
Mhm.
and I think that needs to be considered when looking at the culture of Canada.
Well, I can tell you Casa Loma did very well on those tours. It was nice because they were, non-for-profit, and that really helped them a lot. So they opened up their doors. They did children's tours, like all kinds of things. They really embraced it, which was
Mhm.
nice. But I understand exactly what you're saying with respects to the fact that we are very cautious, we're very conservative. We don't like to take risks, and I think it wasn't until everybody started slowly getting on the bandwagon, like, all of a sudden, there's an influx of shows. Canada actually spearheads a lot
The
of these
irony.
shows.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a great rapport with Blue Ant, I
Mhm.
mean, I had other shows that would come to me and say, "No, Blue Ant told us we should approach you, and you should come and" 'cause I did a couple of shows that were not the normal production houses I worked with, out of recommendation from Blue Ant, who was spearheading literally everything. And, I know when I was offered an opportunity to do my own series, I didn't want I've turned down my own series a few times, and I had somebody approach me and say, "If you could design your own show, anything you want, what would it be?" Anything that I don't have to run around screaming demon for. So, okay. So, they said, "Well, we spoke with Blue Ant, and if this goes forward, they were willing to come forward and actually fund more than they would normally do on any of the other shows." It was a very humbling experience, and once we designed it, you're gonna love this. Once we designed it, it was a very history-based.
Mhm.
Something along the lines of, "Okay, we don't know what happened." Let's say, I'll use Mallory as an example. How do we know? Did he make it to the top? We don't know. But is there a way to find out? Blah, blah, blah. Like just really obscure historical things, the Dyatlov 5, things like
Mhm.
that, right?
Mhm.
Like these are the kinds of things that were put forward. So UK got it. If you have UK, Canada, and US, they all have to be on board when you put out a program, like when you put forward a TV show.
Mhm.
Canada's picking up the majority of it. UK went yes. Travel Channel at the time kind of went, "Nah, we don't know. I'm not American." But I'll tell you something, I saw my show end up on an American channel, tweaked, and they didn't do as well. Huh. But I actually enjoyed the people on it because I followed them on other shows. So I'm like, "Yeah, this is okay." Because I don't care about TV. It was just like you asked me to create something, I created it, and I'm really glad that
Yeah.
somebody's got to do it.
Oh, that's the thing. Canadians, I know,
Right.
one of the ways Canadians digest history really effectively is through a campfire ghost story.
You're
I mean,
right.
growing up,
Yes.
I was born
Yes.
in Welland, Ontario, Niagara region, War of 1812.
Yeah.
You throw a bunch of ghostly soldiers all from here all the way to Kingston, and
Yes.
it's like this just cornucopia of ghost stories
Yes.
involving Fort George, Fort York. I mean, Grenadier Pond in Toronto with the three soldiers who fell through the ice. It's
Burlington had a story and they never saw battle, but it was a resting point where Spencer Smith Park is. They would
Mhm.
come there, they would rest. There was a settlement there.
Yeah,
We didn't know that. It was it was the who was it? The tourism people had their own historic people give us all that information. Well,
yeah.
really?
Well, yeah, the American loyalists were hanged in Burlington and Hamilton area
Yeah,
during that scare. So the
yeah,
1812. So it's interesting, and you find
yes,
out these little nuggets, these little pieces of Canadiana
yes, yes,
through ghost stories. I mean, the Yale House and the PEI is a good example where
right.
I had no idea that Canada's East Coast industry was buoyed by shipbuilding. Like big wooden ships.
Right.
And I'm
Right.
not talking about the variety that Crosby and Nash and Crosby, Stills and Nash sang about. I mean, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's interesting, and the owner of the shipyard would look through the windows through the top of his house and look down, and it's amazing. And in learning about the Centennial Market in Saskatchewan, there's
Yeah.
so much history, and I think a lot of our historical Toronto is horrible with protecting its history.
Yes, it
Um,
is. Yes.
and I always kind of do a double take when they give a certain building a heritage status. It's like, okay, you done screwed up saving an actual legitimate historical gem, and then you're just grasping at whatever you can to, you know, say this is good. No, I mean, no.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's
Huh? Yeah.
but I mean, Canada, the progress. I like what Victoria has done with preserving its downtown core and a lot of
Yes.
its historical buildings.
Yes.
Toronto, concrete and glass. I think Anthony Bourdain took a shot at our architectural style here,
He
and
wasn't wrong though.
no, he wasn't. And it's like it's a city that you got the money. Hey, we'll do it for you. And our provincial government is just saying, hey, guess what? We can build anything anywhere. We'll bulldoze any heritage building, and it's all yours, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think Canada has this mishmash of trying to protect its history and trying
Right.
to learn about it. And God, I like the wonderful work that archaeologists and historians do in this country to keep these stories alive. Major props to Dale Jarvis out in Newfoundland,
Right.
and Adams out in Victoria, BC, and everyone in all points in between. These people, historians, they're are kind of reach out to what
Mhm.
happened in the past,
Yes.
and I think going back to how we share our ghost stories, that's part of the Canadian culture. Is we open up around campfires, or we break down historical facts easier
Mhm.
through these lurid tales of scandalous people from the past who were just as messed up
Right.
as we are now.
Right, right. I agree. I think if you go back to storytelling, it goes back to the Victorian times. I mean, the whole spiritualist movement, in Victorian times. I mean, people love the whole idea of picnicking in the cemetery and sending, like really weird, far out Christmas cards at Christmas, and you would exchange ghost stories instead of presents. And like, I think it's just Canada just kind of stayed there. It just didn't move any further away from that. But I think people don't realize though, to be able to be an enthusiast of the paranormal, you have to be an enthusiast of history
Mm.
because if you don't know the story, what is there to investigate? You could sit and just get all kinds of information, which is really, if you don't know what it pertains to. When I did my tours at Casa Loma or any location or ghost tour that I did, I would explain to them how to do a proper recording, how to, it's not just a matter of throwing something out there, okay, I'm just going to find something. You don't always have the option of looking around you and seeing what's there. Casa Loma, it kept its history. There were
Mm-hmm.
photos everywhere. And all you had to do was take the time to look at that photo, and you could ask questions based on that. And people were getting intelligent responses. Not always, some people were, yeah, we'll leave it there. But, some people were actually starting to get really interesting voice recordings because I think they were asking intelligent questions. And that goes on anywhere. Even
Yeah,
the children, I would do their children ghost tours. I say, okay, well, you're going to have to like history and you're going to have to like science, even a little bit of science. And the kids would look at me like, what? This isn't about ghosts. Sure, it is. So you start them nice and young and you just say, we're just going to have a fun ghost story. And this is why you have to like history. And this is why you have to like science, because you have to look at something and understand how it works to maybe understand, why you're getting the information and what do you do with that information afterwards. It has to connect it to something.
Definitely. That's why I love what the ROM does too.
Yes,
They had their
yes.
kids sleep over, and they share the ghost stories, of course, of the founder overlooking the foyer there, or
Yes.
yeah, it's really awesome there.
Yeah, it's got a great, I mean, the ROM has a great history. We have a lot of haunted locations, and you're looking at, again, Casa Loma, the ROM.
Mm.
I was even approached by Medieval Times.
Oh, really? No.
Oh, they approached us really early days, Casa Loma days, and they said, there's reports, there's something that's going in and pushing the horses.
Oh,
So this was, I mean, we're going back to 2000, 2015, no, 2013. So it was a long time ago. And Casa Loma really, they said, well, Casa Loma, we contacted them and they recommended you guys. But we could never get in there because they're open till 1 a.m, pretty much every
mm,
night, and they were open during the day because they had school groups coming in during the day. So it's not like we could just go in there and try to investigate it at the time or anything like that. But they did give us some really amazing stories at the time.
yeah.
And you want to talk about conservative, Casa Loma would send me on tours to public libraries and wait for this one, extended living or home for the elderly.
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
So, and I would go and I would just tell the story of Casa Loma and the history. And I had more elderly people. You want to talk about what we'll mention, go back what you were saying about how conservative people are and how they just don't really,
Mm.
don't want to talk about it. I had some elderly people that would come out and say, blah, 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 tell me even more history. I learned more history about how that castle was built by elderly people who had family members who worked on it. But there was always a handful that would hide in the background and wait for me to be completely alone. And they would come up very quietly and tell me their stories. They didn't want anybody else to know that they had an experience.
I know that's awesome.
It's,
And
it's
that's
crazy.
so Canadian. Like,
It is.
wait, like, okay, nobody's around to hear, because I don't like. And one of the big things that I really like, I want to do a follow-up article on what I did,
Right.
and I want to talk to people who are. I had somebody reach out to me on the Superstitious Times. He does a podcast. He told me his current employer said he could not do that podcast anymore, or he would lose his job. So I think
Wow.
one of the other things I want to touch on, just like the gentleman who was hired by the CBC, is
Yes.
this threat of an interest.
Mm.
And I think one of the biggest things, and a lot of my friends who are also, they write about horror movies and stuff like that, is Andrea Subasati, editor at Room Morgue, she had mentioned that if you said you liked sports,
Mm.
nobody would say anything. It's like it's a given. Oh yes, sports,
Yeah.
aggro,
Mm.
all that crap.
Yeah. Right.
And then you say like horror movies, and it's like all the stereotypes of horror movie fans come out of the woodwork, and it's like, no, 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 no. I'm not a serial killer. I just like horror movies. I like to understand what scares people now and around the world, which is amazing. Which, we could go off on a tangent and talk about horror from around the world, from
Mhm.
Spain to India to Chile, but keeping it in house, I think is the same thing with the paranormal.
Mhm.
If you have an interest, and Jason Hewlett touched on this as well,
Yeah.
where he reached out to academics to interview, and this one gentleman gave him a really, like, for an academic to come back and
Right.
paint with one brush, one color,
Mm.
was just very unacademic. I just found it very. He started talking about flat earthers, and I think this is one of the risks, right? Because
Right.
we're in a
Everything that annoys them, they're going to talk about, and you're the target.
yes.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
interesting thing I find is we're in a weird state here, right? I won't say we're entirely post-pandemic because the COVID
Yeah.
is still around. Long COVID is going to be
Yeah.
with us for the long run.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
you had the pandemic have people thinking more about their mortality and what was going on,
I
and
agree.
talk of war and rumblings and
Mhm.
relations between nations like China and Russia and war in Ukraine.
Mhm.
So we're thinking about our mortality.
Right.
And climate change, all these things factor in. So there was
Yeah.
an interest in the paranormal. People were
Mhm.
staying at home more, so they're gonna, what was that? What was that
Especially
sound?
the haunted people who didn't know they were haunted because they were home.
Yeah, exactly. I think there was a
I
story in
did get
Tampa Bay.
stories like that.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
story, a person in Tampa Bay who was working from home, and they realized, oh my God, my house is haunted. And why didn't I know this?
I know. Where was I?
Like, I was like, well, that's
Yeah.
the 9 to 5 grind, and then working from
Yes.
home. It's that, like, we're so caught up in our work
Yeah.
lives.
Like do you think too? Because literally the world stood still
Mm,
and went so quiet. And I think it forced us all to pay attention.
mm,
Like you hear things, you don't have all that outside noise going on all the time. So I mean, I realized the manor house was just we knew it was active, but being home all the time was just like there were things going on there. I'm like, we ever heard that sound before? And we would be like, I don't think I have. It's just like, all right then, that's great.
uh, but no, it's awareness. But I think the double-edged sword with the pandemic was it also elevated the sense of conspiracy theories, and
Oh yeah.
in paranormal world, in the
Yeah.
conspiracy, they kind of get unfairly lumped into
Yes.
one blob, and
Yeah.
it's
It's an
unfair.
area of high strangeness,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that, yeah, that.
Stop. Yeah.
But I mean, anti-vaxxers, and then you
Yeah,
had
yeah.
this whole, and
Division. Yeah,
yeah, and it's
yeah.
just so when you say you're interested in the paranormal, some people
Mhm.
are going to say, "Are you conspiracy theorists?" And me, I had somebody pitch a story about flat Earth, and I'm like, I wouldn't touch that with a 39.5-foot pole.
We've
Okay,
had
thank
we've
you.
had a guest on, yeah, a couple times who was a flat earth believer and researcher, and I'm gonna say this, they're very passionate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair, fair.
Very passionate, and it was a learning experience. We learned from all of our guests, and we had a lot of fun with them. And people are just like all over that stuff. But
Yeah,
you have your division. You have people who are
yeah.
just like it's black and white, and the gray area is very literally.
Yeah, it's
It is really tough to get people to open up about a lot of things. And I find with the paranormal, you either love it, you don't love it. If you have a healthy curiosity, you sometimes have your belief system, your religious background that interferes
Mhm.
with that. If you talk to a ufologist, it's one thing. If you talk to a person of faith, it's another thing.
Nothing. Yeah, no, yeah, and definitely. I just thought,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
might what the apprehension
yeah,
to the paranormal is. You know, organizations don't want to be associated with anything that can be remotely perceived as conspiracy theorists, and I think
right.
that pandemic had created
Hmm.
um, that resistance at the corporate level because
Right.
corporations are are entirely
Hmm.
different entities, pun
Right.
intended.
Yeah.
Um, And you see that, and a lot of the documentaries I've watched about corporations and being completely insensitive and that aspect.
Right.
So and that's probably a defense mechanism, because their priority is their shareholders, their
Of
stockholders,
course, it's
investors,
business. It's
right?
business.
You don't
Yeah.
want to be talking to a guy like Timothy Leary about
No. Yeah.
or sorry, O'Leary, sorry, not
Right.
the
Right.
anyway. I think I got
We're
my
with you.
Leary's mixed up. But
Yeah.
anyways, the gentleman from Shark Tank,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and he seems he doesn't put up with a lot of
Right.
bull doo doo. So
Right.
um, yeah, it's that element, and I think Canada, because we're not, we do. There's a lot of Canadians that take risks,
Right.
but Canadians take risks elsewhere.
Right.
And I
Right.
know
We
Morgan had
choose our
touched.
battles wisely.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
In some regards, yeah. And I guess Morgan touched on that too.
Yes.
I mean, the irony of a Canadian production company being at the helm of a lot of the paranormal shows that we see,
Yeah.
like Haunted
Yeah.
Hospitals, which I've
Of
had the
course.
wonderful opportunity to be a part of.
Yes.
And I think it's ironic in that regard, but they're behind the scenes, and that's so Canadian.
It
We're
is.
behind the scenes, below the surface. We like to slide in unannounced,
You
unless we're
do,
watching.
because you slide into freaking first base and your show's a hit. It's smart, really.
I mean,
It's brilliant.
even in sports, Canadians, try to do an interview with a hockey player,
Right.
unless it's Sean Avery or somebody who's very outspoken. I know Avery hasn't played in the league for years, but it's just hockey players don't say a whole heck of a lot. They're they're not LeBron James, or they're not.
I'll tell you though, there's a lot of celebrities. Those are really popular shows. A lot of celebrities coming forth and saying, "Yes, this happened. I had a paranormal experience." Yes, like they're really open about it.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know why Canada hasn't come out with anything like that. Well, I do. What are we talking about?
All our celebrities go to the US. That's why.
But I think, I mean, there's so many people that are closet experiencers.
Well,
They won't come out of the closet with it.
yeah. Well, one of the stories I wanted to work on, and I pitched it to the Toronto Star. They were interested. It was the pandemic, the
Yeah, yeah,
Raptors. There are two well-known hotels that NBA teams stay at
right.
where they're active. There's one in Milwaukee and there's one in Oklahoma City. And I wanted to do a story for the Star about the Raptors players. Had they had weird experiences in these hotels? I can't remember the names of them. I mean, it's a quick, Google Milwaukee Hotel Haunted, Oklahoma City,
Right.
and it really kind of piqued my interest, and that kind of touches on that celebrity. And I've had conversations with some people in my travels, like interviewing people and so forth, and it's come up a couple of times, right? Actors and an actor friend of mine, she's really kind of encouraged me to do the Superstitious Times, and we've kept in touch over the years. She's in Hamilton now.
Right.
But yeah, it would be really cool if Canada did open up. I mean, I grew up on Creepy Canada.
I've done Creepy Canada.
One of my friends from high school was in an episode.
Oh my God. That's so old. I know. I think I did 4 or 5 of those. They were fun. They're history based.
Oh yeah, Terry Boyle was great with that.
Yeah.
And so I mean, we kind of lost that when we lost him 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
So I think a lot of these historical writers who write about Canadian locations and the history behind them are Barbara Smith, to John Adams, to John Robert Columbus. These are the Canadian people that fed our hunger.
Yes.
and beyond the unsolved mysteries, beyond the sightings, and the old In Search of reruns.
I still love
Yes. I mean, I was born in 79, so 77,
I'm
78.
older than you.
Yeah.
I remember them all. I'll leave that right there.
I'm getting at the point where I say I was born the year Breakfast in America by Supertramp came out. And if people know that, then they're cool with that.
That's
And if
right.
you get a cockeyed kind of,
It's like
"Ooh,
meh.
meh,"
Yeah, meh.
yeah. And that's an interesting thing when it comes to history.
Yes.
And I've noticed myself kind of geeking out is when I was working at the Canadian Press. A lot of my colleagues coming in were they weren't alive when the Berlin Wall came down, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. I'm like, feels like just yesterday I watched a bunch of German youth hammering away at the wall, and it's like that was 91, and I'm like, oh,
I remember.
okay,
Yes, yes,
91.
yes,
It's
yes, yes, yes,
almost
yes.
30 years ago now.
Yeah, I know. It's
So
frightening.
yeah, but it's I think if you talk about history and kind of as you mentioned, UK fully
Yeah,
embraces its
yeah,
paranormal,
yeah.
um, and other countries very Germany is not overly forthcoming with it. I know I
Mhm.
had to really dig for the
Right,
Gollum story I wrote about in Prague, Czech
right.
Republic.
Yes.
So it varies. I mean, you can't go on a tour in the UK without having at least
Oh,
one
heck no. I've been on them.
pub.
Anywhere I travel in the world, Brian, I have to stay at a haunted location. And
Yes.
I have been to many parts of the world. I have had experiences, crazy experiences. And I'll tell you, I think it depends on, trying to get information, depends on the
Mm,
person. Now, when
mhm,
I was in Egypt, I had 2 different tour guides when I was there, just doing different things. And I asked them both the same thing. One was an elderly tour guide, and I asked about the Curse of Tutankhamun. Okay. And I was highly curious. Well, the older gentleman's like, oh, he went on. It will kill you. You don't even want to think about it. It will kill you. And I was just like, okay, all right, I get it. It's going to kill me. Okay, thank you. But I asked a younger guy who was there the next day. I'm like, okay, I need to ask you about the Curse of Tutankhamun, right? He started to laugh and he goes, "You know what?" He goes, "You just don't put any merit into that. It's ridiculous."
That
Thank
is
you. I said, "'Cause the older gentleman," he goes, "Oh, the older people are so superstitious and they'll instill the fear of God into you." So I should be dead right now just for asking the question. So
Yeah,
anyway.
well, I mean the Zahi, the Egyptologist that's like everything
Oh,
Egypt.
Ziowas? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and
Yes, yeah.
I watched him with Josh Gates, and
Yeah.
there's this element where put on your mask because we don't want the curse to get you, and I'm kind of,
It's
you know,
true.
yeah,
I
I mean,
know.
it
Yeah.
might be for show because,
Yeah.
there is truth to it, like a bacteria
Sure.
will if you ingest it,
Yes.
sarcophagus,
But it's
but
logic, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's
and
logic. It tells you, so how many thousands of years old? Who knows what's lurking around in there?
was fascinating that you bring up Tutankhamun because my grandmother. This is a lot of my paranormal interests were encouraged and spurred on. Kind of, I was in a secular household, and
Right.
there wasn't a lot of religious background. Um, but part of the reason why I got into archaeology was because my grandmother, who is a war bride, grew up in Newbury, England, and
Wow.
is just outside of Highclere Castle, which, of course, everyone knows Highclere Castle from Downton Abbey now. But
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but Lord Carnarvon lived there, and he helped fund the
The
dig in
Tutankhamun
Egypt. Yeah,
expedition. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and the whole, story of, the dog howling at night and the death and the
Hellhounds.
it's just, it's fascinated
It
by
is.
it. And my grandmother kind of encouraged that. She would always send me clippings about the Beast of Bodmin Moor if there was a large cat sighting in England.
Mhm.
And stuff like I also liked the romantic poets from that England, like Samuel Taylor Coleridge Wordsworth and Keats and all those guys. But
Mm.
I think she encouraged it, and that aspect of the paranormal. She knew I was interested in it. She didn't actively discuss
Mm.
it. She would talk about, oh yes, I've heard those stories. The very stoic British.
Right.
But she kind of encouraged that, and the history was and talking about places like the Ram's Inn and,
Oh, yes.
and Hellfire Club and all these things. Aleister Crowley. So was
Well, the Black
England.
Monk House. Richard Eastepa put me in contact with the owner of the Black Monk House, and now he's, I communicate with him, and he's
Yeah,
like, "Oh, yeah, come out anytime you want to see it." So, you ever want a good article, I'll put you in contact with the owner of the Black Monk House, which is supposed to be the most haunted place in the UK.
awesome, right on. No, I love writing about this stuff. I love hearing the
Yeah,
stories. I'd
but they're
love,
willing to talk about it. You have to go to the other
yeah.
side of the pond, though.
Oh yeah.
You
I,
know?
I just love learning what people believe when it comes to that, and I think part of that is because I had a weird experience when I was out in BC,
Right.
when I was a kid, like 3 or 4 years old, and it's just kind of perpetuated. My parents were going through a tough time out in BC,
Yeah.
so as a kid, you're picking up on it, but you're not sure how to process it because you don't understand adult things at that time.
Right, right.
So, it comes through. But I know when I got older, my mom was saying, she lost her father when she was a teenager, but when they were going through this rough time out in BC,
Mm,
she smelt his aftershave.
yeah,
So that psychic odor. And I actually remember having a conversation with Ed Warren about this over the
right.
phone when I
Yeah,
was in university. So this is like 2002, probably back
right.
then when and he goes, yes, psychic odors. Yes. And it was interesting, chatting with him about that. But
Yeah, yeah,
so there's always been this kind of subtle encouragement to kind of explore that, kind of find your way. And I
right.
think that's allowed me to kind of go in with that, with journalism and archaeology to kind of explore it more.
Well, it's a really good mix, and I think it's nice that you've had all of these little subtle things happen to you that you weren't discouraged from it as a child, or you didn't fear it, and you were able to take it into your adulthood and do something really good with it. Because I think part of the issues with a lot of this and why children don't even talk about it, and then we go into adulthood and we don't want to talk about it, is because sometimes they talk about their experiences and we dub them imaginary friends. They're not
Mm.
necessarily also imaginary, but I think people make the mistake of making the child feel really silly. There's no such thing. Don't be silly. Don't be stupid. Don't talk about things like that. People are going to think there's something wrong with you. Like we stigmatize them, and
Hmm.
they take that into adulthood, and they don't want to talk about it. Now, these are the same people that we are now, you know, having to deal with who don't want to talk about it. Corporation owners, haunted location owners, like eventually they go up and do something, and the mindset is usually just that.
Yes, yeah. There was a Winnipeg psychiatrist who wrote a book about the stigma. Yes, there we go.
Right.
So as I bring it up, apologies for browsing here. So I spoke with Dr. Manuel Mattis, who wrote about wanting to destigmatize the paranormal experiences. That exactly what you said.
Mhm.
That aspect, and stigma. This kind of stigma falls into real estate. I know I pulled up. I did a story a few years back for the Superstitious Times about stigmatized properties,
Oh,
and I
yeah,
spoke with
yeah.
real estate agents. There's a location in St. Catharines that a poltergeist event happened, and
Yes, I remember it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's police reports and all this stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and that property came up for sale, and the realtor is like, LOL, kind of not taking it seriously and
No,
stuff.
but you have to disclose it. I did an article in 2005 about that with a
Yeah.
realtor with the Toronto Star.
Yeah.
You had to disclose it back then.
Yeah. It kind of came on the heels of the Star did a story about the Massey murder, the house over in the Casa Loma neighborhood as well.
Yes.
And I spoke with Leaside realtor Patrick Rocca
Right.
about his experience with stigmatized properties. He's never had a haunted location, but one house came on, one apartment or condo came on to the
Okay.
market. And without going into certain details, it was around the time that a serial killer was in Toronto,
Got it. Yes.
targeting a specific population.
Yes.
And then this
I'm with you
this
on that. Yes.
condo went on the market,
Right.
and it was Patrick Rocca was approached about it, and he said, "No, thank you."
Yeah, we'll just let that one be
Yeah.
because,
So
mind you, the curiosity seekers might have been a good buyer. Haunted places, there are people who specifically look for haunted locations.
well, I'm always fascinated. I mean, you had the Conjuring house on the market, and
Yeah, there
people
you go. That's a perfect
snatched it up.
example. Yeah.
And in these properties, if they're not raised, because I know, certain true crime oriented houses do get raised,
Yes.
especially Bernardo's house in Port Dalhousie was raised.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
the gentleman who abducted the 3 girls in Cleveland, Ohio, his house was raised, um, and held them captive. So there's these certain aspects that if the house is still standing,
Mhm.
people do swoop in. I find that rather grim and macabre. But
They do it though. It's weird.
yeah,
Like
it's
even when we sold the manor, the owner who bought it says, "Wow, the house looks very mysterious." And you're like, "Well, I mean, you Google this house, you're gonna know it's
yeah.
haunted." So, yes, but it's pleasantly haunted. But I mentioned, clear the house and problem was solved. But not everybody knows how to do that, or not everybody thinks to do something like that. But we did disclose it for
Yeah.
sure because you have to. But if I had, oh my God, if I had, $1,000 for every person that said, "Want to sell this house?" When we're ready to sell the house, I'd be just sitting, all right, a little vacation thing going on, all paid for. So there are people who look for it, and there are people who specifically, like me, no matter where they travel, want to stay in a really haunted location. That's just to me, that's just part of, like, I like being in haunted places. I like how it feels. And
Yep.
a stigma, you talk about a stigma with serial killers, it's a stigma with the haunted house as
Yeah.
well. It is really, really tough because you're only able to, you're like half the population, if that.
Yep.
Maybe you're only dealing with a quarter of the population who would want it. And when it's been, because our house is on all kinds of TV shows, we filmed there. People would want to use, the facade. There was documentaries filmed there. It is what it is. Like
Yeah.
now, you're
Oh,
sort of like,
I definitely make it a goal to visit locations that are related to the paranormal wherever I go. So
right,
whether it's Victoria and Craigdarroch Castle or
yeah,
Cadborough Bay,
yes,
when I went out to New Brunswick this past summer, I needed to get to Chaleur Bay to see just where this ghost ship comes in.
right.
Right?
And
So,
any luck?
uh, and in Victoria, my wife and I stayed in a bed and breakfast, and we went on John Adams's ghost tour there for the
Right,
downtown core around the harbor there.
right.
And when the tour ended at the bed and breakfast we were staying at, I could see my wife tense up, like, "Why are we here?" I think
Am I
this,
indulging you again?
yep,
Yeah,
and
right.
it's right by the Victoria Parliament building there. But apparently, there is a floating head without a body that is in one of the rooms. We were
Wow.
staying on the floor, but we were in the room, and she purposely closed her eyes, went to sleep, no problem. I'm there. I'm there in the bed, kind of one eye open. I really want to see something, but I really don't want to see something. Like there's that little kind of bit like I know we're not staying in the haunted room per se, but you know, I was kind of hoping to see something.
Mhm.
But I'm
Yeah.
about as sensitive as a dead battery, so
But I don't think you need to be, sometimes it's the people who want absolutely nothing to do with it who get most of the experiences.
yeah,
And sometimes you shrug it off, like, I don't know, the house is that way. I don't know what it is.
yeah. With me, I
You
do
know?
do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I dismiss it, kind of
Right,
explain it off,
right,
and yeah,
right.
it's fascinating that way. But
Um, Tamara says her mother was a realtor for almost 40 years and had gone to many houses with her that are haunted because she didn't want to close up after an open house alone because they disclose hauntings before they sell them. So I'm just like, God, that would be interesting. And
hmm
it's funny because I've done events at places where the staff, they're there and they're just like, no. I said, do you need me to stay with you to close up? That would be wonderful.
yeah.
They don't even want to be there. So, I was like, all right, okay, that's all right. So,
On social media, I noticed the one time that one realtor, it became a trend, and I saw it first in a place in Massachusetts where they put on top of the sign, "Not
right.
haunted."
Oh, it's
And it's
true.
just kind of like a marketing ploy, right? But
Right,
I
right.
mean, I reached out to this realtor who did that, and he's like, "Oh no, no, that's just me trying to get
To get
extra."
some people there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, why not?
So it's interesting, but the one location that I remember seeing in, I think it was in Massachusetts, and it was just like pretty much across the border from where the Conjuring house was. And
Right,
there's like a lot of history there. So I think they were probably playing off of that Rhode Island
right,
location, and then just kind
right, right, right.
but
But I mean, you're going to have those people, and you're going to have the people. What about the people who fabricate
mm,
the hauntings? Like I say, I've accepted, representing locations. My websites never showed haunted places. Like, I was never one of those people that put the case file out on a website. It's just ridiculous. I've always respected privacy long before it was a mandatory thing. That's just me. I'm not dissing anybody, but that's just me. That's how I prefer to do things. And
mhm,
because I had some people who, were like, I've worked with people in Toronto who were really big business owners, or, who were large property holders, and they had issues, and they're like, this can't get out. It's like, okay, no problem. We're not going to show up with like a logo on your door or t-shirts. I'm like, no, I promise. I know. It's like, I'm okay. but I respected that. Um, but that's my job going in to either, you know, I don't go to debunk, but if there's nothing there when I'm there, then I can't really say, oh yeah, hey, I don't just go looking for things. There has to be some logic behind it,
yeah,
like, but a lot of people, it becomes a thing, and people go in sometimes for the wrong reasons. They go in, where they make it's more important just to get that EVP,
yeah.
or to get that evidence, whatever evidence can be in something that's kind of unexplained.
Something, yeah.
Yeah. So for me, my biggest concern has always been the families, the people who have brought me
hmm
in there in the first place. So you do get people who want to go in what I call professional, um, what do I say? Professional. They're always bringing in different teams, always bringing in different teams. No, we're opening up to everybody just to investigate. It's not a public place. They don't want people staying there. It's not that sort of thing. They just want investigation after investigation. And that's okay if that's your thing. But if you're not hearing, if the story is always the same and nobody's finding anything, at some point you may have to say, well, what is it then? Some
hmm
people just don't want to think, no, there's nothing going on, or they don't want to realize that, hey, you're a pretty powerful person projecting energy. I've become very delicate with that. I just send out like a link, psychokinesis. If you see yourself in this, maybe just let me know, because I don't really know how else to approach it. it's hard for people to think that they can do something like that as opposed to having something really crazy in the house.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it goes swings the other way too. I mean, people want
Yes.
constant investigation. They think something's happening, but nothing's
Yeah.
happening. But then, Morgan Newton brought up the point in the article that she went into a location only. She was invited into the location only if she debunked it,
That's
which is
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's
That's a
like
that's a tough call. I mean, because they want somebody with a reputation to say no, there's nothing here because it makes it more valid.
the caveat emptor though was that the spot in the location, La Boheme in Edmonton,
Right.
um, that she couldn't investigate the kitchen, which is where all the activity happens.
Mm.
So
Funny that.
larger sample size, but not the epicenter to
No. We want
um,
you to have zero experience. Go tell everybody. So poor Morgan. So I have to take a really quick station and sponsor ID. So for everyone just tuning in, you're tuning in to the Outer Realm Radio with myself and Amelia Pisano, who is not feeling well, under the weather tonight. So sending her some big love and get better soon. And I am joined by Brian Baker, who's from Superstitious Times, and we're talking about all the different, things with haunted houses and the paranormal, because it is, after all, International Paranormal Day. And it ranges from stigmas, it ranges from, how people perceive things. You guys are just going to have to go watch it. The archive will be up immediately, so you'll be able to tune in for yourself. So we are fully sponsored by the amazing people over at Folgers Coffee. Thank you, Folgers. They've been with us since day one, and that's a few years now. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you. Also, big thank you to Justin Snicker, Dr. Snick, the sonic surgeon, who is the voice and the music behind our intro and outro. We're so grateful for you. Also, big thank you to Steve McGinnis, the artist behind the banners and logos for the show. So check him out on Facebook and Instagram. We appreciate you very much. So we have, a lot of good people behind us, and a good network as well. So now, notice how quick I made that. So let's get right back down to it. So, what did you learn specifically after writing this article, aside from how safe Canadians are, which is just pretty much in every aspect of Canadian life? So,
I mean, I know the article focuses on who or what locations tend to shrug off the paranormal, but I think there's that also the locations that do kind of embrace it, and the Ottawa jail, of course.
yeah. Don't get me started on that place.
And a lot of the benchmarks of Ontario, Upper Canada history.
Yes.
The forts in Erie,
Mm.
in Niagara on the Lake,
Oh, yes.
Kingston. I really haven't heard a lot from old Fort York, but Fort George and so forth.
Yes.
They do embrace it, and I think they embrace it because, as I mentioned before, history is more easily digested to Canadians through the ghost story.
Right.
So you hear a story, and it also perpetuates that Victorian sense that ghosts are former people that have unfinished business or died traumatically, and war. I remember as a kid wanting to learn more about the plains of Abraham, because people still heard phantom noises at the battle going on.
That's a really haunted location, which, by the way, used to belong to my family.
Oh, awesome sauce.
Oh, it would have been too if you didn't have one drunkard and one other unhappy individual. Oh, yeah, they had to produce a deed to the land, is how the story goes. And the two of them couldn't get along, and they couldn't come together. And they each had different parts of paperwork, and they couldn't bring it together. So it was taken by the province. It was a story we grew up hearing. And ironically, I met another elderly gentleman through a friend. And he said, oh my gosh, my family was the other side. We're
That's
related.
the toys.
But it was a cool validation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot happened in there. Hangings and everything. Did you
Yeah.
go check it out? Like, did you get anything?
I've been to Quebec City. I went to the Citadel, Le Citadel,
Yeah, yeah,
and of course the Chateau Frontenac. But
yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't get a chance because the Plains of Abraham, of course, is a little further west from where we were. We were by the ramparts there, so
Right.
yeah,
Yes, yeah,
nice area. Uh,
yes.
that was for wedding anniversary too. So I
Oh, wow.
did
Your
see.
wife is a champion. I'll tell you. It's just like, "Okay, honey, this is what we're doing."
Well,
It's like,
she
"Okay."
always jokes with me. She's not interested in the paranormal. She wants to keep arm's reach away from it.
Right.
Um, and she always says, "Don't bring anything back with you." And she's
Good
just
for
like,
her. Lay
it's,
down those boundaries.
I
Okay,
mean,
I have to
well,
ask, has it happened, though?
what's that?
Has it
Oh,
happened?
oh
I
no,
have to
no,
ask,
no.
has it happened? You never brought anything
I don't
back?
get out much. I've got 2
Oh,
kids.
right. Right, right, right.
So, I mean, we did, George Brown's old house. I went to a seance that was run by James White,
Yeah,
and some entertainment value there, of course, as well as
right,
some interesting happenings. But
right.
uh, you know,
Have you had
yeah,
any, like, major experience that really just stuck with you, though? Because I mean, let's face it, you've had these small, subtle childhood experiences. You're coming on, you're writing about this. You were talking to people from all walks of life, whether it's cryptozoology, ufology, paranormal. Have you got to experience anything that's what you would deem, let's say, with the wow factor? No.
no, probably when I was, you
No.
know,
Okay.
when I was 4. I mean, it all goes back to when I was
I
4
did
years
when I
old.
was 4. I
Right. I
love
mean,
that.
that seems to be a common thread too with,
Yeah,
when I spoke with Mike
right.
Ricksecker or, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
yeah, a lot of these folks I've interviewed over the time, it comes from something in early childhood, and taking into consideration like the holistic aspect of, what was going on in the family life at that time. My parents needed a kind of a break, so I was being taken care of by friends of the family in BC. I was like on a farm, uh,
mhm.
or a house that was kind of away from. We lived near Maple Ridge. We were in Maple Ridge. I think the house was probably just outside of Surrey or something like that.
Right.
But um, but yeah, yeah, kids pick up on the energy of their parents.
That's
So
true. Yes.
I
Yeah.
think, as a skeptic, I look at it and my experience of long story short, and you mentioned you used it and you weren't scared. I
Yeah.
have to full disclosure say I literally peed myself
Oh.
before you, right? So come
We're
on.
on international radio right now.
But
It's like
what had happened, from what
yeah,
recollection, I mean, this is
right,
pretty much 40 years ago,
right, right.
um, was was staying in a bed. There's like two single beds, window in the middle, and then at the foot of the bed was the entrance to the room off to my left, and then it was a very small room.
Right.
And there were a lot of dogs and cats on this property. I remember these people having a lot. There was a German Shepherd, I do remember. And I woke up to the door opening in the middle of the night. Like it was already kind of open, but it just kind of slowly opened.
Really, yeah.
And I thought one of the dogs or the cats was coming into the room. So I mean, there was moonlight coming in through the window. It illuminated the whole bedroom. So I remember crawling down to the end of the bed, the foot of the bed, and then looking around for, like, if it was the German Shepherd, you see the ears going
Right.
by. But,
That's actually pretty brave for a little kid.
yeah, so just the cat. Well, I didn't know what ghosts were or anything like that. I was
Yeah,
4.
right.
Well, I grew up. I had cats at home, so and nothing. And I kind of pulled myself back up to the top to pull the blanket back, the sheet up back up.
Mhm.
And then I looked in the corner of the room and I just saw this black mass. Like it just,
Oh,
oh, what the hell is that? And it started to
wow.
take the shape of a person. And I pulled the sheet over my head. I had a stuffed Dino that I got from Freddie Flintstone Land,
Right.
which was in, I think, Burnaby or Chilliwack or something like that.
Yeah.
And I fell asleep. Yeah, probably peed the bed.
You just fell
I don't know.
asleep.
I was there. I just like, boom, I was
Yeah,
asleep.
yeah.
So that's all I
So
remember, just that experience. And then that kind of, I don't think that, growing up in the 80s, the shows that were for kids, movies that were kids, you were weirdness was everywhere, like GI
yeah,
Joe, Transformers,
right.
He-Man. I watched Monster Squad and
Yeah, yeah,
Goonies, all that stuff, Labyrinth.
yeah,
And then Unsolved Mysteries was in the 80s. I would watch that constantly. And that
right.
had a good mix. And Robert Stack was creepy AF,
Yeah, yeah,
and
it was.
um,
Yeah.
so it just kind of grew up and it became a part of the culture. I mean, the Usborne books, of course, the ghosts.
Mhm.
So it was the 80s. I mean, it's funny. My kids watch Bluey,
Yeah,
and their dad Bandit references, oh, it was 80s. It was a different, like in that Australian accent. It's a whole
yeah,
different game. And
it's true. It was the Ghostbuster era, though.
yeah,
It really was, I think at that point, it was just acceptable.
yep. And then, sightings came along,
Yeah,
X-Files just
yeah,
disrupted everything. And
yeah,
then you see the people who grew up with that. And then
right.
you get this glut of shows where everybody's chasing shadows in green hued like imagery, like Ghost Adventures and
Mhm.
Taps and all those guys. And
Do you think that ruined it I mean, do you think, like, people feel more encouraged, or do you think it just ruined it for, you know, because I mean, media has a way of ruining things.
well,
It opens your eyes, but it really messes things up too.
yeah, the paranormal and pop culture do play off of each other.
Yeah.
And I think a great episode, X-Files, kind of pokes fun of that. They had an episode that was done a la Cops,
Mhm.
where they're running around trying to chase this figure, and it was actually manifesting as everyone's fears. When they were asking one
Right.
person what they saw, they basically gave the sketch artist a Freddy Krueger. And then
Yeah.
it kind
Yeah.
of, I think, the great thing about horror is it's emblem, like symbolic of what's scaring us as a body, as a nation.
Mhm.
Um, and then the paranormal kind of plays off of that.
Right.
So I think with shows like Ghost Adventures, I do believe it has harmed, because we all people get this perception that all investigations are done at night.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
it's perfectly okay to scream at a ghost, and go all
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's also one, probably a contributing factor as to why a lot of places that have a corporate body don't want investigations going on, because they don't want this dog and pony show. um
Right. I
and
can't say that I blame them.
yeah, no, and I don't either.
Yeah.
So I do think it's changed how people perceive it.
Mhm.
Um, I think that's the thing. Investigations can happen full daytime,
Mhm.
full light. I think that's always the I kind of, whenever I see nighttime investigations, I keep on playing the rap song by Houdini, "The Freaks Come Out at Night." It
Right.
just kind of plays in my head. Um, my head is a complete jukebox, so if you give words, I'll,
Right.
I'll just go right into a song. But I think it has created stereotypes and
Yeah.
tropes. Tropes eventually become stereotypes, and I
Right.
think it's contributed greatly to a lot of supernatural horror. especially the found footage ilk, that kind of subgenre.
Right.
I don't know how many paranormal activity movies there are now, as well as movies like Grave Encounters.
Hmm.
So, and of course the VHS series. So I mean, they play in tandem, just like true crime contributes. It's almost like if you could create a Venn diagram of
Right.
true crime, pop
Hmm.
culture horror, and the paranormal, like
Hmm.
like uncanny, it,
Right.
you'd have them all kind of.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think you also end up with a whole array of what people dub as couch or sofa investigators.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that disrespectfully. Some people just don't have any. They don't have anything. This is the highlight of the day. They don't have ghost tours. Often used to have people saying, how can I start a group, or what can I,
Mm,
they wanted to go to haunted locations, and I would always recommend find the closest ghost tour or event going on, and work safely
yes.
with like-minded people who are there to experience the same thing you're experiencing, and maybe they can teach you how to do it safely in a controlled environment,
And
right?
that definitely, and I think that's
Yeah.
why a lot of people, oh my God, not another investigation of Waverly Hills or whatever. And it's like, well, if you get permission, and that's what a lot of it is you can't trespass.
That's a
And
big
that's
one.
that's the thing. You like
That's a
just
big
like
one.
get the permission. And if you don't get the permission,
Yeah.
time changes. New owners come in. I
Yeah.
mean, the one location I've always was fascinated by, and unfortunately never got a chance. Even in my teenage years, like some people would go down there to party, but the Whitby Psychiatric Hospital,
Out in
um,
Whitby?
out in Whitby, and
I did the one in St. Thomas.
yeah, the one in Whitby was very active allegedly,
Yeah.
um, and the old buildings and so forth. But
Yes.
it's been since demolished, and
Mhm.
and that begs another question: is when these old locations are demolished, are these entities tied to the building or to the land, and are they
Mm.
removed once these new buildings are put up and the old buildings are raised? So that's a
What about
discussion.
the ones that are converted? I think that's what's happening out in St. Thomas at the asylum.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on, are you dealing with, haunted objects, let's say?
Mm.
Um, I've dealt with spirits that see things in their time and they see things in the present time, but I would think it's very land-based. I think it's the energy is in that spot, whatever
Yeah.
it is that caused your trauma, your death, your human experience, as I say, that energy remains, like dimensionally speaking, you are in this time and place. I don't know necessarily that it's the structure itself
Mm.
that would be there. And again, I've many locations, the Coburg Jail being one of them,
Oh, yeah.
went
Oh,
into condos or hotels. I mean, haunted hotels. I mean, Coburg was a jail.
yeah.
It's
And a
like,
Humber College, the Lakeshore campus was a former
yes.
psychiatric hospital as
I
well.
know somebody used to live there. Yeah, I
And
know.
the great stories behind our Queen's Park, our Parliament buildings.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
a
Yes.
women's psychiatric hospital was originally on the grounds, and it was
Yes.
tucked away. The history of Toronto was fascinating because
Yes.
where we have all the hospitals, that's where there were slums and so
Yeah.
forth.
It's true. Yeah.
And it's so fascinating. And that asylum was kind of out of reach. And then when the fire happened and they moved the Parliament buildings of Upper Canada up to that location,
Right.
which
Right.
you can always shrug off our politicians' actions as being, well, the Queen's Park was built on a psychiatric hospital with ground.
It's
So
it's true. It's true. And some of the old theaters, the Winter Garden Theater, the Elgin Theater,
yes.
we've been asked to go in there, specifically requested to go in for a TV show in Toronto. We said okay, and they were really amazing with us. They brought us in, and I started just reading what I was finding, and the manager had been there at the time for 20 years. He's like, okay, I need to show you something. And he would allow us to go places that were normally off limits. And he goes, what do you pick up here? What do you pick up here? So I just started picking up things. And he started validating all kinds of things. But here's what I found interesting. He goes, I'm going to show you something really interesting. I said, okay. So he brought me downstairs. He said, when we did the renovation here, we lifted up the grand staircase. He goes, we're literally being held up by these giant cables and everything else. And we dug down. He goes, what do you think we found? I said, I don't know. He goes, a house. What? He found a house under the theater. He goes, yeah. He goes, you want to see the well? They have the well.
Oh,
In the
fascinating.
basement where all the offices are. He opened up this curtain behind glass. He goes, this is the well of that farmhouse. Because back in the day, the water came all the way up. I'm like, my mind just went. I was like, what? The history was just mind-blowing to me. How many other places are there like that? And they're, with the haunting and everything else, it's no wonder.
Well, that's that. The whole story with the Rom and the little girl ghost near the planetarium.
Yeah.
And they suspect that there was loose threads of historical kind of things happen, and there's a house on the property and associations, but there's so many buildings that are built on top of. I think it was in Montreal. And there's houses built on old houses, and where was it? Years ago, there was an archaeology dig down at Fleet Street in Toronto where they brought up, a condo was going in, and they found this old ship, just like I knew a friend of mine who I went to university with archaeology for. He was part of the dig. So it's just really neat that the Toronto we know,
it's quite different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just fascinating, and
people don't realize how far up the water actually went at one time. Think about where the Elgin is.
Well, the harbor building, the Toronto Harbor Commission or whatever, it's like that's where the water was at one point.
Right.
So it's really neat, the backfill and all that stuff to create the Leslie Street Spit and all these locations. I know it's inside Baseball Toronto, but
no, it's fantastic though. It's fantastic. You wonder why it's so haunted. The history. If anybody takes the time just to look up the history of where they're from, everything has a history. And I always say, we're not the first kick at the can on this planet. You're starting to see all sorts of things surface. And that doesn't count what's underwater, even though they're finding it, because we have the technology.
Oh, what they've been able to do with archaeology and just find an entire settlement in Thailand by Angkor Wat, and he even in Illinois was the largest indigenous settlement.
I know,
and it's amazing. That sense of curiosity is what drew me to archaeology and university.
Yes. Well, look at all of these out of place artifacts. Like you wonder why. Is it haunted? Is it a lot of residual? Yeah. Imprinting? Absolutely. There's all that. There's just a frequency, resonation, and everything just stays within a certain time and place. You can turn around. I always say to people, you can turn around and yell at your significant other, get into a full out verbal brawl, and come back into that exact spot and like 2-3 hours later and wonder why you're feeling foul. Like stuff just imprints in time and space. So that's going to apply to, think about it. When somebody passes away, do you know what kind of energy you release, passing? There's it leaves such an imprint. It's just, people don't look at the whole logistics of it, the quantum part of everything. It's just fascinating. But, now you would have a city like Toronto or New York where everything is on top one another, all these old cities throughout the world where you have, like city over top of city over top of city, burial over top of burial over top of burial. I'm sorry, people. It's just a haunting waiting to happen. So
Edinburgh and in Paris, France, and all these locations. Yeah, definitely. and building in locations that have just had to deal with natural disasters and having to rebuild over it, like places like Istanbul and Turin, Italy.
Yeah, that's a lot of craziness, Brian. It's a crazy, crazy world that we live in. But thank you so much for joining me tonight. It was super informative. It was a lot of fun. Perfect for International Paranormal Day. So tell everyone, what do you have coming up? Where can people find you?
Well, I've got a lot of stories in the hopper that I'm working on. You can find my work, my features on Superstitious Times. I do every so often. I write for Haunted magazine, which is based out of England.
Very nice.
So as I mentioned, I did a piece on the Prague Golem for issue 37.
Very nice.
Be able to find some copies still on stands. And the upcoming feature I have for Haunted is for their summer issue. I spoke with folks about the lack of LGBTQ plus representation in the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, there's a great, I spoke with Stu Maddox, producer, who did a show called Queer Ghost Hunters. Fascinating approach to paranormal and actively looking out. I went into the story to kind of feature, if the idea that past trauma keeps entities on this plane of existence, perhaps the trauma of, homophobia or not being able to be who they actually were has kept them kind of.
That's a fascinating perspective. That's very interesting.
So a couple great conversations. Joey Harper spoke with her, and Fox Smith, and big thank you to Alex Metzuo and Morgan Knudsen for pointing me in the direction of contacts.
Yes.
And so I'll keep up with that. And the Superstitious Times. I do have another project I'm working with a fellow writer friend, and we're looking to expand the medium of the Superstitious Times.
Ooh.
So working away on that, and
very nice. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, I the Superstitious Times, I keep it strictly kind of Canadian, but with Haunted magazine, I've been able to branch out and talk to people from around the world. And
so if people have crazy stories, they can reach out to you.
Yes, you can. More.
See, some people do want to talk about it.
So if you have a haunted location, I'd love to just feature it. And just I do have stories that I do want to share even more.
Right.
Whether or not there are people performing exorcisms in Canada and so forth. So that would be an interesting article to actually discuss and broach on.
Right. Yeah, I think so. There's that. That's a touchy one.
Yes. No, it's
one.
trying to keep stuff. Not bringing my work home with me, of course, as my wife would say.
Yeah. Well, some topics will potentially make that a possibility more than others.
Yes.
So tread cautiously, my friend. Tread cautiously. But thank you for joining me, and I'm looking forward to seeing, obviously, everything that you come up with. I do read all of your articles. I enjoy them. I am always humbled when you ask for me to contribute, because I always know you're going to do complete amazing research. You're going to do it justice. And I never really have to ever worry about what you're going to put in it. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'd really like to see what you're going to do to that before you go live with it. I never worry about that with you.
Thank you. That's great. It's been an honor, actually, realizing that it was International Paranormal Day. It's a huge honor to be able to talk about paranormal on this day with in a medium.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Well, yeah. I'll send you some links if you want to share it up, and the audio link will be, probably be ready tonight, and I can send that also, and we'll do it again.
For sure. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, I probably talked more than I should have. It's just, when you speak with someone of like mind, it's just so easy to get a really good dialogue going. So it was a pleasure.
Awesome.
So thank you, and
Thank you,
have
Michelle.
yourself a great night.
Thanks.
Um,
And to all your New Orleans listeners, I am a huge Saints fan. So go Saints.
Whoa, woohoo! Hey, Brian, thank you.
All right. Take care.
Good night.
Night.
Well, that was a fantastic segment. Just, people don't realize I met Brian when I worked at Casa Loma, and he came a couple of times to do a story on myself and on the event. And it's just been a really good working relationship ever since. And check out Superstitious Times, because you will see really good writing, you will see really great research, and really, really great articles. And you'll recognize a lot of the people who contribute to these articles. So head on over and check him out. Again, Superstitious Times. He's awesome. So we've come to the end of another fantastic segment here on the show. Big thank you to Brian for spending the evening with us on International Paranormal Day. We're really appreciative that he gave us his time and all of his stories. And big thank you to Folgers Coffee. Big thank you to Justin Snicker, the Sonic Surgeon, Dr. Stick. We love him. Big thank you to Steve McGinnis. Again, guys, whatever platform you are watching the show on, like it, follow it, subscribe it, share it, comment, everything. We appreciate you for it. If you'd like to contact us, again, the Outer Realm contact at gmail.com, or just find us on the Outer Realm on Facebook and just click the email button. Best way to get a hold of us. And tomorrow night, hopefully my little bubbly companion will be feeling better, because we're going to be having an open discussion night. Yay! So those are always a lot of fun, and it becomes more about you guys in chat than it is really about us. We always start off with a really good topic, but who knows where it's going to go. It just goes anywhere, and we really, really, really appreciate you all for tuning in. So thank you for being with us tonight, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Good night.